School me here. What is this women's intuition thing that I am failing to understand and failing to trust because I, as a man, too often revert to logic?
I think that one of the biggest factors, I would say, is women's connection to our bodies. I think that there can be a little bit more disconnection in men from their bodies. You men are, out logically, rationally doing all the things, and you don't necessarily have to be as connected to your bodies. You also may not have the luxury of being as connected to your bodies.
Here, I'm going to make the counter argument here, which is I think the body lies.
Sometimes what we call intuition is actually fear.
And if you don't know the difference, you can sabotage a good relationship.
In this episode, we break down how intuition really works, how patterns shape it,
and how to tell when your nervous system is actually lying to you.
I'm Emily Goff, a relationship coach. I've spent years exploring how we connect to grow and heal in love.
And I'm Kelly Gardner, an embodied leadership coach and communications consultant. Love isn't theory, it's practice.
This is Love in Practice.
Let's grow this.
This is a big question because this is one I think nearly every woman I have ever worked with has battled with this question. Is it intuition or is it anxiety? And how I describe it is think of your intuition as a lake. And sometimes there's a duck paddling at the very top of the lake. And it's, kicking up its feet and splashing its wings and all the things. And that, to me, is what anxiety typically is. The intuition is at the bottom of the lake. It's where everything is still and calm. You might not necessarily like what you find there, but that's usually how you can differentiate. If there is a sense of urgency, the panicked sort of stressed feeling of anxiety, that is very different from the calm of intuition.
Okay. So basically what I'm hearing is how your body is relating in that moment, how your nervous system feels can clue you as to whether or not this is your intuition or you say anxiety.
That's usually the comparison that I use.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when you say anxiety, what I hear is story.
Story, fear. Yes, sure.
And when I say story, I mean that there is a story running that is creating a reality in my brain that is convincing me that this is the way that things are unfolding. And because I have that story, it is a confirmation bias. It is confirming what I fear, what I believe to be true, and in many ways making it appear true, even if it weren't necessarily true.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing is that intuition is something I feel that is honed over time. So the intuition that I had when I was 6, let's say, is not the same intuition that I have at this age. It has grown, it has expanded. Why? Because of life experience too. That has created discernment for me. Certain life experiences, a wide variety of life experiences, have taught me the subtleties where I can better learn to discern one from the other. And it has made my intuition stronger as a result. And I think that most people can relate. I have certainly had moments where I look back. It's always the hindsight is 20/20, right? I'm like, oh, my intuition was telling me one thing and I chose to listen to something else. But it's really easy sometimes to override our intuition, to justify it away. We're very logical beings. Our brains can create logic and justification for just about anything in a split second. So to your point, yes, the stories that are underlying, they can have a really big impact. And again, I bring it back to the body. Like if you can take a moment of stillness for yourself and to go inward, to really sit with yourself, take a few deep breaths, ground, and ask yourself the question that you're trying to decipher the answer to. you probably actually know the answer. Again, you might not mean you like the answer, but you probably already have the answer within you.
So as a man, I think I struggle with this notion, and it often comes up, the women's intuition.
Yes,
You've
and
got to
there's
trust
nuance
the
to
women's
this.
intuition, right?
Yes.
So school me here. What is this women's intuition thing that I am failing to understand and failing to trust because I, as a man, too often revert to logic?
Well, first of all humans have intuition. I am not of the camp that believes that women somehow exclusively have access to the divine.
But you've got some kind of superpower, right? I mean, there's some kind of, I just know, trust me here, that I need to really follow. So help me understand, what is this? What am I missing? For all the men out there that are going, what am I missing? What is this all about? Please help us, please. Help me understand.
Well, again, I want to stress men have just as much access as women. And you actually are also someone who is highly intuitive, very intuitive. But I know you're fighting for the men here in general.
I am.
Yes,
You know me.
I hear you.
Come on, help us out. Help a brother out here.
Honestly, I think that one of the biggest factors, I would say, is women's connection to our bodies. I think that there can be a little bit more disconnection in men from their bodies. And with women, we kind of have to be more connected to our bodies, simply because even if you just look at the hormonal cycle that we go through monthly, you guys have a cycle that runs on a 24-hour period. Women run, give or take, on a 28-day period. So there's a lot more nuances and complexities sometimes to the shifts that women feel and experience in our very bodies all the time. So I honestly think that is one of the barriers, is that you men are, I'm speaking wildly generally here, but out logically, rationally doing all the things, and you don't necessarily have to be as connected to your bodies. You also may not have the luxury of being as connected to your bodies.
Here, I'm going to make the counter argument here, which is I think the body lies. We've all been there. You say one thing, your partner hears another, and suddenly we're off to World War III.
Those moments aren't about who's right. They're about what's unhealed.
That's why we created the Relational Compass. It helps you see your triggers, your strengths, and how to turn conflict into connection.
5 minutes, powerful insights, totally free.
Find your direction at lipcouples.com/compass and start loving in practice.
Running a marathon. There's this thing called the wall that you hit when about 18 miles into a marathon, where basically your body starts saying, no, you are not doing this. This was a bad idea. I am shutting down. This is not what you're supposed to be doing. If you ever run your first marathon, you experience the wall. And there's something, it's amazing, that happens when you push through that wall and you say, you know what? I'm sorry, I'm not listening to you today. I'm gonna continue on this way. And eventually, as you continue, it gets easier. And those signals start to go away. And it's almost like there's this part of your body that's just like, there's a governor being like, you can't do this. And you're like, yeah, I can. And like, oh, we can. It's kind of like when you're traveling down the road and Google tells you to go this way. And you're like, no, I'm going to go this way. And then eventually it's like, yeah, you should go this way.
Something he does all the time.
Don't trust it. Don't trust it. You know where you're supposed to go.
See, you're using your intuition as well as logic and experience and discernment.
So where am I supposed to trust my body? What is this wisdom that my body is giving me that I'm missing? Because, sometimes I think you're right. There have been plenty of places where I've needed to override my body. And because I've continued to override it, my body's like, yeah, I'm not going to send that signal. You don't need it. You're not going to pay attention to it anyways. I bump into something. I have a gash in my leg and I don't even notice it until, later I'm like, why do I got blood on my, oh yeah, that's right. When did I hit something,
Again, this is a literal real life example.
Yeah, because I've neglected those signals, and partially just because, things need to get done.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And, I think that you bring up a really beautiful point. That's why I love long form content, because I simply cannot, I see the nuance and everything, and I cannot possibly pack all the nuance into a 90-second reel
Nuance me,
sometimes.
baby. Nuance me. Come on.
Because I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right that the body will also give indications, feelings. For example, let's bring it back to anxiety, fear, particular story. If I am in a stress state because you and I had a fight, and it's triggering an abandonment wound in me, and I feel like you're going to reject me, or, it's pushing on my very survival instincts. Those are stories. And those stories create, again, I'm speaking real life. This is what happens in those, particularly intense moments. For me, anxiety shows up as my stomach being in total knots. It's just clenched. If I listened to that and only that, I don't think we would have made it a month into our relationship. So that can't be the only indication. I feel we have to pull from a variety of sources. We need to pull from self-awareness, understandings of our patterns, our behaviors, our stories, our history. We need to look at who we want to become, who we are growing into, the person that has the qualities that we want to embody more of. And that version of us has the relationship, for example, that we so crave and really deeply desire to co-create. There's sort of looking at all of these different factors, and it sounds so complicated, and I get that. And to me, this is a practice, just like anything else, love and practice, right? Combined with the body and the intuition. And asking yourself, if that knot in my stomach comes up, I get to sit with myself and ask, where is this coming from? And that is still part of going down to that root stillness and asking myself very pointed questions like, is this true? Is this story I'm telling myself true? Byron Katie, I think I mentioned this on a previous episode. Byron Katie has the 4 questions, which is, what is the story I'm telling myself? Who am I with this story? Who am I without it? I can't remember the others right now. But, is this story 100% true? Is this story true? Is it 100% true? Who am I with it? Who am I without it? And once I can combine all of those factors, sounds like a lot of work. Some days it is. Some days it's a lot easier than others. Some days it's a pain in the ass. Unpacking that, and with practice, it usually becomes quicker. And there start to be familiar patterns that I can sense within my brain and within my body. To go, oh, this is familiar. This is fear talking. Like, is the situation I'm in distress over, is that actually matching my level of anxiety? Or can I intuit, we'll actually be okay, and no matter what, I'll be okay.
So what I'm hearing is that you use logic to clear up your
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is why I am not of the team that is like, women are the be all end all intuitive beings and men are the be all, logical beings. I'm like, no, we both have both.
Okay.
We both have both.
But what am I missing here? Like, there's still something that it seems to be so important.
Well, what is intuition to you? Tell me.
Intuition for me is my Spidey sense.
Okay, say more.
Intuition is, I'm looking down that alley over there, and there's not necessarily a side on something feels wrong. Something feels like I shouldn't walk down that alley. Now it's kind of taking in a lot of different pieces, but there's a I would say intuition is very much related to pattern recognition. I often say that I'm really good at predicting certain outcomes. You could call that my intuition, but it's also because I've seen these patterns replicate themselves. I could say, yeah, I could see that coming, but I've seen it before. I've seen how the patterns of life replicate themselves, and it's not so much of a mystery. It's not so much of a, will this happen again, or will it? There's a high likelihood that this could replicate itself. And so to me, intuition is more just about being aware and being one with the patterns of life. Surfing, great example. There is a pattern. There's a replicable pattern that's happening as that wave crests, and there's a rhythm of that happening. It can logically count it out. I can say, okay, this swell happened this many times. There's a number of that have come in. I know that there's going to be a period between the next swell before the next set comes in. I can logically count it out, but I can also just sit out there and go, I can feel it. It's about to come, right? My internal timing system has become one with that pattern. I'm not looking at my clock, but I can feel it's about that time. It's about the time for that next set to come in. I'm going to paddle out just a little bit more, and there, I see it. There it is out on the horizon. I'm becoming one with those patterns. So I think that's, for me, what I think of when I think of intuition. But there's a certain logic to it, but there's a certain feeling that's present to it as well.
There is. And there's been a lot of work done around this to try and unpack what the hell intuition is, because I think most people have difficulty describing what intuition is, because it's like, how do you break apart that Spidey sense that I think every single one of us has experienced at some point? What I would challenge you on a little bit, and I'm challenging you while also simultaneously agreeing with you about the pattern recognition, but also, what about the times when it's not a pattern? So, for example, you looking down the alley, the dark alley, maybe you've walked down that alley 1,000 times. Maybe that's on your route home. You've been doing it for years. You've been walking down that same alley. Your pattern is that there's not an issue going down that dark alley. Then all of a sudden one day, it's just this little hair standing up on the back of your neck, or some sort of physical sensation, or some just sort of overwhelming sense of not today. Mm-hmm. Take a different route today. Mm-hmm. How do we describe that? And in terms of how that also plays out in relationship, so my question to you is two-part. That's the first part. The second part is, how can we ever hope to create new patterns and to be open to creating new patterns if we are in our own belief system of, okay, we're in a relationship. I've seen the same pattern play out with my partner 1,000 times. Mm-hmm. Where do I give them or the relationship space to change? Mm-hmm. And to be open enough to allow them to step up in a different way without projecting my expectations on them of, oh, this is how they've been before. This is just all I can expect from them going forward.
No, that's reasonable. I think you're right when you come to that question of, looking down the alley and there's just something that feels off and feels different. I think that there are senses that are within our body, our ability to kind of sense within those patterns, something just feels off. Mm-hmm. We were looking at the real estate market this year, and I'm very well aware of the patterns and how they're starting to replicate, but something just felt off this year. Mm-hmm. Everything was lining up in just the right way, but it just felt a little bit off, and I decided to sit on the sidelines a little bit. And it's been a very interesting year. Not what I was expecting coming into it. And you could chalk that up to my Spidey sense. You could also just chalk it up to fear.
Sure.
Looking at doing a new pattern and doing something different, I was a little bit more hesitant than doing the things that I had done in the past. And so with uncertainty, less likely to make that action because of fear. But I think you also bring up a really good point here around the patterns that we see replicated in relationship, and how they can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Refer to this often as the core negative image that we hold of our partner, that again is like that fear. Because I believe in this story, then I am more likely to experience or expect it to happen again. And as a result, it does happen again in my experience. And that's difficult to, with the wave, it either came or it didn't come.
Yeah.
I have observable evidence that it came or it didn't come. And it's difficult to have the same kind of objective reality when it comes to my partner. I expected it to come. There it came. It's like in The Matrix when she says, when he knocks over the plate and he says, the Oracle says to him, the question you're really going to ask yourself is, if I wouldn't have said anything, would you still have knocked over that plate? Because, of course, I'm in that relationship too. And my expecting you to have that outcome also leads me to create behaviors that are going to contribute to you having that outcome.
And then that outcome, the experience of that outcome starts to calcify. So that core negative belief that I'm then holding about you as my partner starts to deepen and harden and become less malleable and open to change. And that's not receptive. That's not very loving.
No. But I wouldn't call that intuition. What would you refer to that as?
The core negative belief?
Yeah.
Closure. And ironically, in terms of intuition, I think that in order to be available for intuition, you have to be open. You have to be receptive. And that's not even necessarily being receptive to someone else. That's you listening to yourself, but being open to receive whatever answer is coming down for you. And people look at this differently. It can be perhaps like some people feel that the message came directly from God or from source or the universe or whatever, that they were divinely protected in a certain moment where they chose to not go down that dark alley that they've gone down 1,000 times. I've certainly felt that way in certain moments. But I do think that openness is the key.
So whether it's intuition or judgment or pattern recognition, there has to be some level of openness to being wrong, openness to a third possibility, openness and curiosity being the key, right? That's the one that really, really makes the biggest difference in relationship, to something that I don't know.
Openness to the unfamiliar and uncertainty. Yeah. Receptivity as well. Like openness and receptivity, I think, go very closely hand in hand.
So what I'm hearing here is the space of I know what I know is somewhat anti-relational.
Yeah.
And the space of I don't know what I don't know is the opening that creates the opportunities for connection.
Yeah. And we have had moments in our relationship multiple times on both sides of the equation. There have been moments where you will point out a particular pattern of mine that isn't working for you or for us or for me. And it comes out in a way or in a moment where I'm dysregulated enough where I then start to get really upset and have expressed to you, I feel like you've now put me into a box that you're not going to allow to see me change and be open to me changing it all because you've just now categorized me or labeled me as this thing, this pattern that you keep experiencing from me. And I have, more or less said the same to you. And you have said to me, don't underestimate my ability to grow and change. And I think that despite those moments, you and I actually do a really good job at being open and receptive to the other one changing.
Yeah, I don't want to get meta here, but whenever you get into that statement of you're putting me into a box, I believe that you're putting me into the box of the guy who puts people into a box. And that triggers me. I'm like, I'm not the box guy. I'm not the guy who puts somebody in a box. And you're like, I can't get out of this box because you put me in this box. I'm like, I'm not the box guy. And then we're off, right? We're off. Here we go. It's like, challenge to my dignity, challenge to your dignity.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's a pattern in and of itself.
Pattern.
Yep.
Bing, 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 bing.
Pattern.
One. So what do we do when we see these patterns?
Well, for one thing, I think that there's also this whole idea that, it's not necessarily about your intuition. Your intuition might just be the alarm bell. When it comes to relationally, like, when we're talking about relationships specifically, look, if your intuition tells you not to go down the dark alley, please don't go down the dark alley. Okay. Like, listen to the Spidey sense. But when it comes to relationships are built upon so many of our long held stories, beliefs, even things that were passed down to us generationally, things that we might be carrying in our very genes, like from epigenetics, like stories that have been passed down that we get to break apart. And those patterns, the more you can recognize that it's actually the patterns that are running relationship, and that your intuition might just be the surface level alarm sometimes, and to look at it a little bit more closely before you decide to write off a person or a relationship without looking at the patterns that are also being played out.
Okay. Help me understand that. Like, give me a real kind of example of what that looks like when we are mistaking the alarm or the intuition or the alarm and not really following it.
Okay, here's one. So recently, you've been dealing with an ongoing shoulder injury off and on, just kind of nursing it, and it's usable, but it's been bothering you, and you've also been trying to sleep different ways and retrain yourself to sleep differently so that you can, because you notice that sleeping on it has been part of the problem.
Getting old, y'all. It's real. Like the little things, they just don't heal like they used to. But I'm still on it. Go ahead.
And one of the things that you decided to do was to go sleep in a different room for a few days. And to give context to this, I was feeling kind of disconnected from you before that. We had just had a couple weeks that were like incredibly full. There was a lot going on. We didn't really have much time to connect, and things were finally starting to calm down. And I was looking forward to reconnecting with you. Instead, I picked a fight.
Her favorite way of reconnecting,
which I have realized is a pattern of mine if I'm feeling really disconnected from you. So don't worry, I'm working on that very actively, and things have been a lot better since I realized that pattern. And you happened to, it was coincidence. I knew that it was coincidence. You had already made the decision to go sleep in a different room for a few days to help support your health and your shoulder. And you explained it to me very, very kindly, very gently, but we had also not resolved the conflict either. So I was feeling a certain kind of way about that, but also really wanting to make sure that you felt supported by me in taking care of yourself in that moment. That was really important. And for God's sake, you should be able to sleep in another room like for 3 nights without me freaking the fuck out. Being abandoned.
There are women out there that are like, 3 nights?
I think it was more like 5
nights?
or something, but still.
I don't remember.
And I was having a bit of a time. I also, there were other extenuating circumstances where I was not at full capacity either. So it also just felt a lot harder to manage that sense of disconnection from you to begin with. And what was your original question? Where am I taking this? Jesus. I'm so sorry. I'm creating editing work. I just want to make sure I tie this loop, and I'm like, oh my God.
Intuition at its finest right there. when we don't need to have logic, we can just intuit. No, I'm sorry. Oh.
I don't even know if he's going to edit this out or not because he's in full control of that and I don't care either way. This is a very human moment you get to witness if it stays in.
Well, when does intuition, when does the alarm and the intuition draw us astray?
Right. Thank you. Okay. So I was having a moment about that. I didn't sleep very well that night. I was sad. And I was kind of sad and sort of put off for a couple of days. Now I managed it better than I have in the past, but I was still feeling like very distant from you and then also kind of keeping to myself as a result a little bit. That is another pattern of mine. And I also just really talked myself through it though. And there was a reason why I wasn't, pissed off with you or anything like that. I was just like managing my feelings and a little bit down, which was a huge improvement over that sometimes in the past, similar situations in the past, because sure, I had a knot in my stomach a little bit initially of, oh my God, we're, feeling so disconnected and this doesn't feel good and just that underlying sense of rejection. And yet I overrode it because not only do I have more trust in us than I have ever had, and that is something that grows over time, that cannot be rushed. But I also have, trust in you and in us, but I also have more trust in me than I've ever had before. And that's important because if I'm just constantly relying on my partner to prop me up, that's an old pattern that is not going to work in the long term. And that's also not the relationship that I want either. Like to me, a relationship needs to be two self-led individuals who are capable of regulating themselves. Sure, sometimes we both, one or both of us, will need co-regulation. Tends to be me more often, and I'm okay with that sometimes. And that continues to get to be a work in progress. But I'm not going to, in that moment, what I recognized was that was not actually my intuition talking. That was fear. That was a story. That was an old pattern of mine coming up and being projected onto you. And it was also a conversation of, with myself of what pattern do I want to embody now and going forward? Where am I working towards? And it's the woman who is fucking secure enough that her husband can nurse a shoulder injury in a separate bed for less than a week. And it's fine. And it does not mean anything about me or the relationship or the quality of our connection or how much depth will continue to grow between us.
Okay. So the alarm bell comes on and says, he don't want to be with you no more. He gonna sleep in the other bed. That means he's not wanting to be in a relationship anymore. That's gonna lead to him not wanting to be with me anymore. Is that the alarm bell we're talking about?
Basically.
Okay, yeah.
Perfect voice too.
Yeah. So it kind of sounds like that, right? When it
Well,
comes to
a little more whiny, but yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the best whiny voice I got. I'm sorry, I was doing my best whiny voice, and so that voice comes on, and where does the alarm bell that interrupts that voice? How do we not get caught in that voice and interrupt it with the other voice that says, he's a grown-ass man, he's nursing his shoulder, he's going to be back, he will, always does, there's no loss of love for him. You said you loved him 2 years ago and he still believes it, he ain't no stop, it's like, it's the great one about the couple that go into the therapy and she says, you never say I love you. And he said, I said when we got married, if it changed, I would have let you know.
So classic.
Right?
Yeah.
So what's the voice, or how does that voice come online that starts to interrupt that pattern of okay, this is the alarm bell ringing. This is the story that I'm creating. And a pattern might be to reach out and say, no, you can't leave, or, constrain that independence in a way that then triggers a pattern for me of, a lack of freedom. And, how does that get interrupted?
That has been my life's work so far, is unraveling that very question.
And so we'll get back to you in episode 4,332.
No. It comes with, yes, doing a lot of work, but continuing to show the fuck up and continuing to be open to growth and keeping your heart open to trust.
Back to that open thing. Man, this open thing, this got some juice to it.
I can't remember. I've done so many podcast episodes in my life so far that I can't remember if I've said this on one of ours or previous ones, but I really feel that one's ability to very intentionally, and it requires intention, to keep your heart open to trust other humans. Not willy-nilly, not throwing it around to people who haven't earned it, but just being open to allow people to show up for you, allow people to show you who they are, for better or for worse, without the expectation of it being worse, to be clear.
Okay. But where do I draw the line, right? Because they've shown up, they have hurt me, they have upset, they have shown up in such a way that is painful. I want to put up a wall, keep myself safe. How do I know that I should drop that wall, be vulnerable, and let them potentially hurt me again?
Well, first of all, are we talking about the same person? So with that question, is it, I could very easily look at my past relationship history and look at all the different ways in which I've been hurt by different people and decide that those patterns are the ones that I'm going to continue to operate from. Or I could look at the overall pattern of you and of our relationship and see the overwhelming evidence that you actually break a lot of those patterns. Have you still heard me in certain moments? Sure, but not like that. And I get to choose what I am going to believe. And I get to choose the life that I'm going to create in a lot of ways. There's also an enormous amount of privilege in that. I fully acknowledge that. But I get to decide what I am available for. And if I focus all of my energy on the much smaller list, significantly smaller list of the ways that you have hurt me, compared to the overwhelming pile of evidence of all the ways in which you have shown up for me over and over and over again and built those patterns, I'm going to create two very different realities based on which direction I decide to focus on.
Yeah, I think that's easy when easier when a person has demonstrated a behavior that says this is trustworthy. Even sometimes that can be difficult.
Yes, for sure.
Because
without question,
I've seen those patterns. My system is on high alert. It wants to protect me. So I go into the protective patterns that are going to ensure that they do certain things or that I get certain outcomes, even when I may not be getting those outcomes. But what about when I am getting those outcomes? What about when, let's say, you're in relationship with someone who has an addiction problem, and you love them very dearly and deeply, but they relapse and they continue to relapse. And at what point do you start to say, maybe they've been clean now for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, but there's still a part of you that says, yeah, I know what you do. I know what the impact of that is when you do that. When there is evidence that the person has continued to do that thing, what do we then do? How do we relate to that? At what point do we say, no, I'm keeping myself safe because I've been given the evidence that you're going to do this? How do we work through that dynamic?
That's a really beautiful question, and that's so valid, because I think that a lot of relationships hit a point like that at some point over the course of a long relationship. That can happen, and that's a really valid example. I know people who have personally gone through that. That brings up a whole other set of issues around standards, boundaries, and expectations. Standards being, what are your minimum requirements that you expect the people closest to you to meet? What are the minimum requirements that you expect yourself to meet? What are the standards you are holding yourself to? It's really easy to point a finger at someone who has relapsed, perhaps in this specific example, but who has hurt you in one way or another, however that looks. And are you looking at yourself with the same level of microscope too? Not to berate yourself or beat yourself up, just to be honest and to offer yourself compassion in those moments. Are you communicating your expectations to the other person? Are you being honest about that? Are you being honest with yourself about the expectations you have for you? And boundaries, similar to the expectations, like, what are your boundaries? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you holding boundaries with yourself so that you perhaps are not as deeply impacted, still permeable, but not as deeply impacted or hijacked by someone else's behavior? And outwardly, are you setting boundaries with others too? And ultimately, I think that those are really difficult decisions that have to be made. At some point, Terry Real talks about this. How does he phrase it? Is the pain of leaving the same as the pain of staying? Or which one is worse? Which one is greater? And that becomes a question that you might have to seriously ask yourself in those instances.
Yeah.
Because not every relationship is meant for a lifetime. Sometimes it's meant for a chapter or a season.
Yeah. What I hear is you're saying, what of this can I own?
Yes.
What of this in this situation where this person continues to play into these patterns? I can spend time focusing on the things that they are continuing doing, or I can look at this and say, what of this do I get to clean up? To acknowledge the places where my patterns might be contributing to their patterns, whether it's me not saying anything. That's one way that I'm not necessarily holding my boundary. I'm not communicating. I'm allowing it to, I'm not saying things that I'm seeing. I'm allowing them to continue. And I get to practice being honest and saying things. Or maybe I'm nagging. Maybe there's something where I literally am just continuing to push that person down and degrade them in a way that is also triggering their negative pattern. How am I complicit or participating in that pattern? I get to look at what my part of that is. And as I often say, if I don't clean it up in this relationship, I'm definitely going to repeat it in the next one. So that's where I get to take leadership in that. Instead of focusing on this question of how do I keep myself safe, I think the better question might be is how have I been failing to keep myself safe? How has my pattern been failing to keep me safe and perhaps contributing to my own lack of safety?
Yeah. I think that's a really beautiful way of putting it. And one of the biggest things that I have noticed within me is I have set a new internal level of safety for myself. And that did not come overnight. I want to be really clear. That took at least a full year to a year and a half for me to set that. And I'll give a very specific example. When I get deeply, deeply stressed, my entire body will actually start to shake. And it had never happened in this relationship. It happened in my 9-year relationship, but it never happened in this one. But then over time, like 6 months in, it started happening sometimes with you. And there was a little bit of a story for me that was like, oh, be careful. This is an old pattern. This might mean that this is not the right relationship. Like, there's something wrong here. If your body is going into this much of a like literal full body state of dysregulation, there must be something wrong. And of course, then that just further contributed to the dysregulation and everything else. This is a perfect example of the body responding to a story in some ways. And it was a comment that you just said to me in passing, like a few months ago. You said something, a couple months ago, maybe. You said something about when your body used to shake. And when you said it, I was like, oh my God, my entire body has not shook in months. And I feel internally this new baseline level of safety within me that is just mine. Like it's independent of you. It is just mine. It lives in me. And yet our relationship has benefited massively as a result of me feeling safer within myself.
I hear people out there going, yeah, but how? What did you do?
Oh gosh, there's a long list. It is repeatedly showing up to do the work. It is repeatedly practicing, coming back to the table, showing yourself compassion, showing your partner compassion, getting curious, like asking questions, really deeply trying to understand your partner from a place of not judging, and practicing not judging myself and my own reactions to you, and just seeing them for the patterns that they are, that are designed to keep me safe. And when I can see them from that viewpoint, it allows me to have a lot more compassion, which allows me to really accept myself more and to not live in such fear state that I can be completely shaken, sometimes literally, or used to be, by even the idea of something going wrong in this relationship. There's also a lot of pressure on this relationship when I was living in that space. It's a lot of pressure on you. It's a lot of pressure on the relationship. That doesn't feel good.
A lot of pressure on you.
A lot of pressure on me too. Yeah, it's true. It's a lot of pressure all around. And if you can relax a little bit more, and that has to be a practice, like relaxing into the relationship, because I think there's also this idea, and you and I have fallen into this trap before. We are very heady humans. We know a lot about relationships, and we are genuinely fascinated by relational dynamics. So sometimes we have gotten too far into talking about the relationship rather than living in it. And what I mean by that is, processing to death, talking everything out, like needing to have a conversation about absolutely everything, like unpacking every single little thing, because, oh my God, if we don't unpack this pattern, we're just going to keep repeating it. And then that will be the death of us in the long term. Can you fucking relax? Yeah. Like bring some fun back into the relationship.
Yeah. I think what you're pointing at is really what's the conversation that our nervous systems are having.
Yeah.
What is the engagement that our nervous systems are having with each other? Because the conversation that they're having is a lot louder than the conversation that is coming out through the words that is taking place. We all know this when the energy feels off. This is our intuition. Really, I think that there's, science just hasn't quite come yet to fully understand what all that we are taking in within our electromagnetic field.
Yeah.
the energetic experience that we have within relationship to another person. We often refer to this as the nervous system response, the energetics that it can feel and respond to, and how it can respond to someone else. But I think that really comes back to this question of my intuition versus what is the emotional experience that I'm having that can't be faked by words, but can be felt in an experience. And I think this is one of the key things that we do in our work with couples, is to first identify the traumas that have led to the patterns that we're playing out, begin to interrupt those patterns. And once we interrupt those patterns, go into co-regulation. How do we allow, now that we've interrupted that pattern that we are so adept at playing, how do we then begin to have a new conversation with our nervous system so that we can then go into the relational conversation, which is what we're really deeply seeking to have. It's not the information, but the relational conversation that's at stake. And we can only really have that productive conversation once we have nervous system regulation.
Yeah.
That's the practice.
That is the practice. Love and practice.